A successful tech CEO had built his empire on the belief that hard work and merit determine success. But one night, when he noticed Rose, an elderly cleaning woman, working unusually late in his office building, his worldview was shattered. Driven by curiosity, the CEO, Jonathan, made the impulsive decision to follow her home, where he uncovered a shocking truth that left him speechless. The building was quiet that night, the kind of silence that came after the last meetings ended and the lights on most floors had gone dark. For Jonathan Hale, those hours usually meant focus, time to look over reports and remind himself that discipline and effort always paid off. He had built his life on that belief, certain that hard work was all anyone needed. When the clock struck past midnight, Jonathan finally closed his laptop, slipped his papers into his briefcase, and left his office for the night. As he walked through the lobby, adjusting his coat, his eyes landed on someone he had never really noticed before. An elderly woman pushed her cleaning cart slowly from desk to desk. Her back was bent, her steps heavy, each movement showing the weight she carried. Normally, he would have walked past without a thought, but something about her made him pause. She stopped in the break room, glancing around before slipping a small container of leftover food into a worn bag. Her hands shook as she tucked it away quickly, almost like she feared being caught. It wasn't the act itself that unsettled him, but the secrecy, like scraps of food, meant more than they should. For the first time, Jonathan questioned his old belief. If she worked hard, why did she need to do this? Against his nature, he decided to follow her. Jonathan didn't leave right away. Instead, he lingered by the shadowed edge of the lobby, watching the woman move from one corner of the office to the next. Her routine was simple: wipe the desks, empty the bins, replace the liners. But her body carried it out with effort that was impossible to miss. Each time she bent to lift a trash bag, her knees wobbled slightly, yet she steadied herself without complaint. There was no rushing, no half-done tasks. She worked with the same care as someone polishing silver, though the world would never notice. Jonathan felt a strange weight settle over him. For years he had prided himself on recognizing strength, rewarding effort, and cutting down excuses. But here was a kind of strength he had never considered: the strength to keep going quietly, long after most would have stopped. When she finished, she gathered her few things into that same worn bag, holding it close to her chest, as though it contained something fragile. Jonathan's chest tightened as he noticed the way her shoulders curved inward, not just from age, but from the habit of protecting what little she had. This wasn't about saving food anymore, he realized. It was about survival. And before he could argue with himself, before logic could remind him it wasn't his business, Jonathan felt his feet move. Curiosity pressed harder than caution. He would follow her. Jonathan trailed her at a careful distance, his polished shoes sounding louder than he wanted against the marble floor. Outside, the night air felt sharper than it had minutes before, as if the city itself were testing him. He watched her shuffle toward the bus stop, shoulders hunched, bag clutched close, and when the bus arrived, she stepped on without hesitation. He followed, feeling out of place, as he dropped coins into the slot, the gesture foreign to a man accustomed to private drivers and tinted windows. The bus groaned forward, dim lights flickering, and Jonathan slipped into a seat near the back, keeping her in view. She sat alone, pressed against the window, her bag held tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on nothing, as though even looking at the world required energy she didn't have left. Outside, the scenery shifted with each passing mile. Towering buildings and glass storefronts gave way to cracked sidewalks, shuttered shops, and blocks of homes leaning tiredly into the night. Streetlights buzzed, some glowing weakly, others broken altogether. Jonathan's chest grew heavier as he realized how far this world was from the one he lived in every day. For years he had told himself he understood his workers, that paying them fairly was enough. But here, on this bus rattling through forgotten streets, he felt like an intruder, someone who had never truly seen the path they walked. Jonathan stepped off the bus a few paces behind her, his breath fogging in the cool night air. The streets were darker here, lined with buildings that sagged with age, their paint chipped, their windows patched with cardboard or old curtains. She walked with steady purpose, never looking back, until she reached a narrow apartment block where the hallway light flickered weakly above the door. Jonathan stopped near the curb, uncertain if he should continue, yet unable to turn away. From a distance, he saw her climb the stairs slowly, each step taken with the caution of someone long accustomed to exhaustion. When she disappeared inside, he moved closer, his eyes catching a sliver of the room through a cracked window. What he saw pressed against him harder than any boardroom battle ever had. She set the bag gently on the floor, kneeling with the care of someone who had learned to save her strength. Two small figures darted out from behind a thin mattress, children no older than 6, their faces lighting up the instant they saw her. They scrambled to the bag, eyes wide, not with greed but with desperate hope. She pulled out the container, divided it carefully into small portions, and handed it to them with a smile soft enough to hide the truth. They ate quickly, eagerly, while she sat back, watching, refusing even a bite for herself. Jonathan's chest tightened as he noticed the way her hand brushed the little boy's hair, the way her voice soothed them with gentle promises of tomorrow. But behind that smile was a woman stretched too thin, carrying years that didn't belong to her. And in that moment, Jonathan understood. She wasn't just an employee sweeping offices at night. She was a grandmother raising children on scraps, fighting battles no paycheck had ever eased. And he had never once seen it. Jonathan sat in his penthouse that night, surrounded by glass walls and polished stone. Yet nothing about the space felt solid anymore. The image of the frail woman and her grandchildren replayed endlessly, cutting through the comfort of his world. For years he had told himself that wages at his company were more than fair, that opportunity was there for anyone willing to reach for it. But was that true? If she worked harder than most, why did dinner look like scraps shared between hungry children? The questions came sharp and unrelenting, pulling apart the belief he had lived by. He poured a drink, set it down untouched, and stared at the skyline. Was helping her charity, or was it something deeper? He wondered if stepping in would mean crossing a line, blurring the clean divide between business and personal life. Yet another thought pressed harder. Wasn't it already personal when people who gave him their strength returned home empty-handed? He had spent his life chasing results, but now he was haunted by the silence of her apartment, by the look in those children's eyes. Right and easy had never felt so far apart. The next morning, Jonathan asked his assistant to bring the woman to his office. She walked in cautiously, her uniform neat, her posture stiff, as if bracing for bad news. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the careful tone of someone used to being overlooked. Jonathan studied her for a moment, then spoke plainly. He told her he had seen her the night before, that he had followed her. The words landed heavy, and she froze. A flicker of fear, then shame, crossed her face, and she looked down as if waiting for judgment to fall. But Jonathan's tone was steady, not harsh. He told her he wasn't there to accuse or condemn. He told her he had seen her life outside these walls and realized the system he had built had cracks wide enough for good people to fall through. She shook her head, insisting she didn't need pity or charity, that she was managing. Jonathan leaned forward, voice firm, eyes unwavering. "This isn't charity," he said. "It's responsibility." For the first time, the balance of power shifted. Not a boss speaking to an employee, but a man admitting he had been blind and choosing to change. Jonathan walked into the boardroom with a weight in his chest, but his voice carried none of it. Around the long glass table, investors and executives waited, expecting another quarterly plan, another strategy rooted in profit margins. Instead, he laid out something they didn't see coming: wage increases across the company, new benefits for older workers, and an emergency fund for families in crisis. The room shifted quickly from surprise to resistance. Charts were pushed back at him, warnings about shrinking margins and unhappy shareholders echoed from every corner. For a moment, it felt like standing against a storm. Then Jonathan said the words that stilled the air. He would cut his own salary to make it possible. The room went quiet. For years he had measured worth by numbers, but now he was betting on people, and even those who opposed him recognized it was more than talk. Weeks later, the changes began to take shape. Turnover slowed, relief spread through break rooms, and for the first time in years, workers felt seen. Jonathan watched it all, but the image that stayed with him was simpler. One evening, he saw the elderly woman leaving earlier than usual, groceries in her hands, her grandchildren running to meet her with laughter instead of hunger. He understood then that real strength wasn't in the empire he had built, but in choosing to protect the people who kept it alive. Sometimes strength isn't in building an empire, it's in making sure no one is left behind.